Welcome to UberCube, the podcast we discuss all things Cube, but with Alka-Seltzer plus Daytime, not a sponsor, currently using though. Holy cow. And this is your host, Anthony Adams, aka Uberbear, and suddenly my dog walks in, Odin, to say hello. Say hello, Odin.
The dog.
Yeah, secret. Yeah, the dog. What else we got?
Hi, I'm May, another co-host.
I'm Stu. I am the technical advisor here at UberCube. Thank you for listening.
Technical consultation, Stu. What are we paying you these days? What's the going rate for UberCube technical advisors?
Not enough.
Stu? I thought we had him chained up in the basement, so he did all the tech work.
Shh. They can't know that. No one will listen. But that is true. Yeah.
Blink twice if you need help.
Anthony, stop walking so loud. I can't sleep down here in your basement.
We're going into part 2 here of what we kind of talked about, this new Aetherdrift, this new set that just came out, that at first glance, I didn't think I was going to be adding a lot. And as a matter of fact, a lot of people said they weren't going to be adding a lot. And the more except for our good friend Bones, who has an Aetherdrift type of, a Gonjo Drift vehicles cube, I could see the challenges. If you're a connoisseur of the artifacts and or an artificer, you can see where something like this set actually provides a lot. And we're going to talk about some neat cards today. And before we even get going into the drinks and all that, May immediately pops in and says, oh, shoot, I totally forgot to talk about a card during the last episode. Thank God we're doing a back-to-back episode. May, you're on the spot. Real quick before we go into drinks.
So the card that I forgot to mention that I wanted to throw in, I completely overlooked, is called Monument to Endurance. It's 3-mana artifact. Whenever you discard a card, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. Draw a card, create a treasure token. Each opponent loses 3 life. It is really good. It does everything that my discard stuff is wanting to do.
That card is nuts. A lot of people that are running cycling. Yeah, people that are running cycling and all that. Yeah, why'd you miss that card? That's probably one of the best cards in the set, May.
What do you want from me? There's a lot of cards.
There's a lot of cards.
I saw this on, I generally look at Mythic Spoiler, and this is in the MTG Arena art. And I'll be honest, I don't know which ones, do they have exclusive and unique to MTG Arena cards in these sets that are maybe for some of the arena-specific formats or whatever? I don't know. But yeah, I agree. This is pretty cool. It's 3 mana for something that goes really nicely with cycling or any other sort of discard-y kind of ability. And yeah, I think this is a good choice.
Yeah, so we kind of cracked into that. Let's go ahead, and since we got caught up on that card that we totally missed on the last one, let's go ahead and have our drinks for this particular episode. So I kind of, I spoiled mine. Mine is an Alka-Seltzer. I pop, fizz. Daytime, let's go. Hey, what are you having?
So, since I'm continuing the theme of actually being the one drinking alcohol this time, I am actually having a Jefferson County Cider Works original apple, where it's just semi-sweet hard cider. It's pretty tasty.
Yeah, I'm keeping it kind of low key this evening. I'm going to have myself, it's a glass of Sauvignon Blanc, and it's the Yellowtail Pure Bright. This is like their kind of half-strength wine. They have like a couple of different variations of white wine, like a Sauvignon Blanc and a Pinot Grigio that's only like 7 or 7.5%. So it's basically about as much as a fairly strong beer. But it's nice and it's light and it's just something I can sip on while I'm recording with you two beautiful people.
I don't want to be an Alka-Seltzer snob, but I'm having mine room temperature. It's just the way I drink my Alka-Seltzer.
Gross.
So, yeah.
Gross.
Yeah, so gross.
All right.
Hey, so
part 2.
This is a new set.
Yeah,
part
new
2.
set, Aetherdrift. So we covered a number of cards. Again, we'll include these, as we always do, in the show notes. We started out with Radiant Lotus, then a couple of, one specifically, an Elvish Piper replacement edition, if you want to call it that. Couple of potentials for Power Vintage, which both May and I agreed were probably a little bit like unfun and maybe outside the power scope for a Vintage Cube, as well as a couple of other sort of cycling. This is one of the cycling-y effects or sets that we've had recently that May is in particular a big fan of, right, May? You like that?
I do love cycling.
Love some cycling. So, part 2, let's start out with our first of its type in the show. It's a Planeswalker. Anthony,
Gasp.
Tell us about this
Audacity.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of focus a little bit. This conversation is going to be around Uberbear's Artifact Cube. You know, whose cube? Uberbear's cube. But for Artifact aficionados and people who have listened to the show for a long time, I've had some rule sets in that cube. And one of them is I've never had a Planeswalker in that cube because typically I'm dealing with Tezzerets or Durettis or some form of Nissa or a Vivian and I could keep going. But at this point, they either hate artifacts or they break artifacts. That's kind of the two directions that we go here, no matter what Planeswalker we choose. And I've kind of enjoyed the environment for not having Planeswalkers in there. It's been a unique identity piece. And, for, you know, it's when Planeswalkers first came out in Lorwyn, they did create that whole dynamic, that conversation of what are these additional game pieces and how do I track them and all that. That wasn't what influenced my decision here. But rather, I just wanted to have all about the mechanics type of environment. So you're looking at, as Stu stated in a previous episode, many like it. It was originally, its origins were artifact versus anti-artifact type of environment that later kind of evolved into advanced and mechanical synergies, right? And over time, multiple cube cons being featured, this cube has just really starting to come into its own. And then comes along the Aether Spark. And this is the first card that caught my attention, and I am trying to decide, do I want to break my original rules for the one card for a new Planeswalker type, which I'm going to read now, go into that cube. So the Aether Spark, for 4 colorless, you get a 4 loyalty, legendary artifact, Planeswalker equipment. It's a lot of stuff there. As long as the Aether Spark is attached to a creature, the Aether Spark can't be attacked and has, whenever equipped creature deals combat damage during your turn, put that many loyalty counters on the Aether Spark. So the loyalty counters from the Planeswalker aspect are as follows. +1, attach the Aether Spark to up to 1 target creature you control. Put a 1/1 counter on that creature. -5, draw 2 cards, and it starts out with 4 loyalty. Or -10, add 10 mana of 1 color. Not super high on this card, but this was the first one to ever catch my eye that falls right down the center of what my cube is trying to do. How do you two feel about this card? I think it's a lot to process, frankly. As if Planeswalkers weren't harder.
Being a Planeswalker that you can't attack is definitely spooky, but the things that it's doing aren't particularly spooky, so I think it's unique. I think at worst that it is just an additional +1/+1 counter every turn. Like, don't get me wrong. Paying 4 mana, putting a +1/+1 counter on something and drawing 2 on your first turn and then your second turn that it's out is just kind of whatever. And yes, hypothetically, there is a world in which you can get enough counters to somehow draw 2 every turn somehow, but like, I think the amount of fantasy Christmas lands situations that it has to be in order to be good is very high. But that's just my evaluation, so...
You kind of align with me. I'm not super high on it and add to that environment either, but it did catch my eye as the first one that broke my rule set that I would consider, but it doesn't do enough. It's somewhere between Cauldron Complete meets some kind of weird Ugin thing, Karn thing. I don't even know what this thing is. It's interesting, but...
I think this card is bonkers. I think you're both massively undervaluing this card. Yes,
Probably.
There is the ability for the creature to get removed before the loyalty ability is activated, but oh well. But I think the fact that it's growing a creature, you can draw cards, it can grow exponentially large, right? Adding 10 mana for doing nothing but just attacking with a creature has got an insane amount of potential, and I think the -5 to draw 2 cards is a good ability, but the fact that this is going to be very, very difficult to remove because you're relying on having to remove the creature first and then attacking when it's fallen off the creature. So it's just resources in order to get this off the field, and I think this is going to be a huge tension piece in whatever cube it's included in. So, when I say bonkers, I'm not going to, make the... I don't want to assert
I'm probably undervaluing it.
I think this card is insane.
It is. Because the fact that you get to put that many loyalty counters on whenever it deals damage, my main assessment is by the time that you are doing 6 damage a turn, you should already be winning in a limited setting. And that is my main reason that I just kind of am overlooking it. So yeah, I'm probably misevaluating it, but I
the
see
reason
it as
why
making
I'm
more.
not looking at it for my environment, even though it does fit those parameters of almost breaking in, it creates like this curation. It goes from I need an abrade to I need a murder to I need a hero's downfall. And it changes to 3 pieces of different type of removal at that point, sort of, kind of.
Well,
in so many words, right?
Yeah, I mean, all of the above are going to do pretty good on that.
Yeah, but I don't want to include.
It's apparently bad. Sorry to interrupt, but it just says deals damage.
Deals damage,
not to
not
player,
combat damage,
just
not
damage.
to a player.
You cannot block
deals damage.
Yeah, it's kind of spooky.
Ding, ding, ding.
I still think it's a little win more, but that is really spooky. I completely overshot the fact that it's just when it deals damage. It does not care.
No, of course not. So it could be that you just attach it and swing with it, and you've attached it to a 2-power flyer that's now got a +1/+1 counter on it that now deals damage, and now you get to draw 3 cards. Even if it gets blocked, you draw 3 cards. Even if it gets blocked by a 1/1, you're still drawing those cards.
That's fair.
This card is bonkers.
Drawing lots of cards is very powerful.
You're drawing a lot of cards and potentially a recursive ability to draw a lot of cards for only 4 mana. It's not the only effect in the world that allows you to draw a lot of cards for 4 mana, but now you have a Planeswalker. It's an artifact, so it has that additional type that makes it a little easier to remove, because obviously it can be hit by artifact removal and it can be hit by Planeswalker removal. But it's a must remove, in my opinion, because it's every turn that it deals combat damage. If this was deals combat damage to a player, I wouldn't have nearly so high an opinion of it. But the fact that it just deals combat damage is why I like it so much. Oh, I'm sorry, I should say.
And why
put that many loyalty counters on it. So it is put loyalty counters on it. You don't get to draw cards every time it deals damage, but obviously you deal damage, you -5, right? -5 when it already comes in with 4. You're ticking up to 5. You deal 3 damage with it. It's up to 8. Okay, draw 2 cards for -5. Hit it again. If you hit for 3, now you get to draw another 2 cards, right? I think that's enough power. Is it, like I said, is it vintage cube power level? I don't know necessarily that it is. Maybe it is, but I think it's strong. I think it's bonkers. I love it.
Yeah, but the recontextualization of what I talked about before goes from a braid, and we'll just skip over murder and go straight to Hero's Downfall. I haven't had to speculate on the idea of killing planeswalkers in that environment, and I don't want to introduce a specialty type of removal to get them out of there with a Hero's Downfall type of effect. You see the problems that I can kind of run into with the signaling and all that, because I've omitted planeswalkers for so long. It creates its own challenges that I have to introduce a whole new way of playing Magic into that environment. I just don't think I'm not going to add it.
I wouldn't include it in your artifact cube. I wouldn't. I've played that cube enough. I wouldn't include it in there. I think it has a lot of places that it's going to fit, and it's going to be very powerful, and it's going to be fun. I don't think that cube is one of those, but just evaluating the card in a vacuum, I think it's bonkers. I think it's fun. I think anytime you get to grow creatures and draw cards and potentially add an absolutely ludicrous amount of mana for the simple, just pay 4, add it to a creature, and then just swing. It's almost like a bit of a fire and forget kind of thing, right? If you don't really care about drawing the cards, you don't need to draw the cards, which, I don't know, maybe you're some kind of lunatic that doesn't care about drawing cards. You can maybe just sit on it and just wait for it to get to 10 loyalty, and then you get to add 10 mana. I mean, that's pretty strong, right? I don't know. Maybe I'm just crazy, but maybe adding 10 mana of a single color isn't particularly powerful, but I like it.
Yeah, I don't feel like the mana that it adds is the particular sticking point. I think it's mostly you could potentially draw 2 every turn, and if you just stick this onto anything that's relatively big enough with evasion, then it's just, I'm now dealing 6 damage every turn, and then drawing 2 additional cards.
Yep.
Answer me or die.
Yeah, you've got to kill the creature, and then, obviously that is the condition, right? If you kill the creature, it drops off. Now it's just a planeswalker, and now you can swing at it. But if you don't kill the creature, and to allow it to drop off to just be a planeswalker instead of equipment, you can't attack it. So now you've got that tension. How do you attack that creature? You have to have removal for it. So beautiful little tension piece. Love it.
So let's kind of switch over here a little bit. There's a new card that's come out, but I want to preface this with, and this is to kind of quote May about how do you help your packages that are struggling? And I've had a package in my artifact cube forever, and it's a known quantity for definitely struggling, but I just have no intent of ever cutting it. It's too much fun for me. And that's the birthing pod package. And for those that aren't familiar with the idea of birthing pod, hang on a second. So the way birthing pod reads is for 3 colorless and 1 Phyrexian or green mana. You can pay 1 or N Phyrexian, tap, sacrifice a creature, search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost equal to 1 plus the sacrificed creature's converted mana cost, or CMC. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, activate only as anytime you could activate as a sorcery. So the idea of the deck is to basically keep scaling up, and it's a fun constructed type deck that's really hard to pull off in here. And with the advent of adding, and we talked about this in a previous episode from the feedback that I received, I've added in such protection spells to really help these type of decks maneuver around it. In addition to that, and I've seen people recently pull this off at Ravenfest, someone did an Oswald Fiddlebender deck. I can't even say that word if I wanted to. And it kind of follows that same type of constraints, but it tracks down the idea of artifacts, and you're kind of just moving forward in time. You're trying to scale up. But there's a new card that has come out that I'm really excited about, and I realize it's a little slower, but I wanted to help this package, and it's Repurposing Bay. For 2 colorless and 1 blue, you get an artifact. Pay 2, tap, sacrifice another artifact, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrificed artifact's mana value. Put that card onto the battlefield, then shuffle, activate only as a sorcery. So we have a birthing pod exclusively for artifacts. I think this is a fun Magic card. I think it's a little slower, but I think it's interesting, and it's a neat build around. What do you think about this card, both of you? I'm throwing this out to the audience here, specifically Stu and May being the audience.
I think redundancy is good. Like, there's just not a lot for me to say since you already have that package included. But if other people are wanting to consider putting Artifact Pod as kind of a thing for your cube, the big problem that it has had for a while is that if you get all the pieces but are missing the pod, or if you get the pod and you're missing all the components, then the deck just doesn't come together. This kind of helps because it'll add an additional option that does the same thing, and I think that is important.
I would agree.
What do you think, Stu?
I would agree. So I love me some redundancy, and I am a big birthing pod fan. Again, going back to the modern discussion that we had during part 1, that back when I was a dirty mono-green Stompy player, Grixis Death Shadow was huge at the time, and also birthing pod was modern legal at the time, which it no longer is. Splinter Twin was also legal back then, and then it was banned, and it's been recently unbanned. Hallelujah, and congratulations to all the Twin players. But yeah, cards like this I think are fun. I think they can be very restricted to how critical are the individual pieces, like how much can you afford to sack another artifact, right? How important are the addition of 1 CMC to whatever piece you're going to get with the sacrifice of the piece that you've removed. So I think this can be good in your artifact deck. There's definitely decks that I can think of, even off the top of my head, where, okay, getting rid of that 2 CMC or that 3 CMC to get that much more powerful 4 or 5 or 6 or whatever, however I can chain them together, I think is good. I think ultimately with anything like this, it always comes down to speed. It's 3 mana to cast, 2 mana to activate. That's 5 mana. Even just on that turn, it comes, that it could potentially come down. So on 3 mana, you're now not doing anything. On 4 mana, you're not doing anything. On 5 mana, you can bring it in and you can do so. But if someone has the ability to remove the artifact that you've brought in, you spent a lot of time and a lot of resource investment to do something where you've potentially got no value out of. Now, I know that's kind of a dies to removal kind of argument, which I don't particularly like, but it still is the fact that it's a heavy resource investment and it's very, very dependent on the deck construction and the cube construction. Obviously, we're talking about this in the context of your artifact cube, but, you know, also just thinking about it from the context of any other cube that it can be in. So I think from a playability and a fun perspective, obviously it's got both of those boxes checked. And like I say, I like these kind of cards. They're tension pieces. It is acting only as a sorcery, which is a restriction that I think is incredibly necessary on cards like this. But I think from a fun factor and from a deck building challenge perspective for your drafters, I think this is a big win.
I think the main opportunity cost is the fact that it costs 2 mana rather than the typical 1. But if you don't really care because your environment's slow enough anyways, maybe. But I don't know. I think it's fine enough. It adds redundancy.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, Birthing Pod is 3 and a Phyrexian green to activate, and 1 and a Phyrexian green, to cast, and 1 and a Phyrexian green to activate. Whereas this card is just straight up 3 mana to cast, and then 2 mana.
And Oswald is just a white.
And Oswald is just 1 white, exactly. So, yeah, I think they fulfill very different purposes. I think that this is a good card. I think it will be a fun card. I honestly don't think it will be a broken card or a problematic card. I think it fits fairly organically in that cube. I think it's cool. I think it's fine.
So I have something, since I'm adding this and I'm planning on it, and I've already got cards that we talked about recently, like Apostle's Blessing and stuff like that gives temporary protection. There's a new card that I'm adding also that I haven't mentioned. It's not on the show notes, but Defend the Rider for 1 green. Get an instant, choose 1. Target permanent you control gains hexproof and indestructible until the end of the turn, or create a 1/1 colorless pilot token with this token saddles or mounts crews vehicles as though it power were 2 or greater. So I'm going to add one more.
It's the best 1 mana instant speed. Don't destroy my thing in green.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm adding counterplays in order to allow these little bit of slower, we talked about this before. The last CubeCon, KCI was brought up as being fragile, and definitely Birthing Pod is fragile. So I'm going to add green's identity is going to change a little bit to less hate and a little bit more love and a little bit more protection. So I'm going to slide those pieces in. So I'm ordering Defend the Rider as my newest piece. And it'll probably be my last one. I don't want to get too many in there. I want people to be able to remove these. I want them, but I do want to protect these slower strategies. So that's my strategy going forward.
I like that approach. I think this has obviously, this is a set. It's designed to be drafted and played as a set. The cards all synergize with each other. And I think this is a great example of where there are some good individual cards for a cube like yours, but I also think that this is a great opportunity for anyone out there that's looking to put together an artifact-centric cube, especially, obviously, anything that you want to include cycling or you want to include vehicles. You've got this smorgasbord of options now with this set. So I can definitely understand from your perspective where you want to be kind of limiting on the number of inclusions from this set in particular, but I think the possibilities for cubes that have got some of those types and archetypes included within it or potentially included within it, I think it's a huge opportunity.
And so those are all good points you guys made about that. And I do want to protect these fragile strategies. The next card that I'm thinking about adding, and the reason why I'm going to add it is because I'm wanting to peel back some of these staples. I want to get back to the grassroots of this is an artifact cube. But, some of them are going to be prevalent. The preordains, the counterspells, the ponders, the lightning bolts type things. I'm not cutting all those. But over time, through attrition, as cards that come out that are more centered around the artifact cube and can play into synergies, I'm going to add them. So Grim Bauble is one that has caught my attention. For 1 swamp, you get an artifact. When this artifact enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn, and then you can pay 2 colorless and 1 black, tap it, sacrifice this artifact, surveil 2. I just think this is a neat little efficient removal spell. I mean, frankly put, it's not, sorcery speed, but it's not awesome, but it does play into a lot of the stuff that I want to do in this environment.
I think it's fabulous. I think it's an absolutely wonderful card. It's only one black. It's almost a guaranteed removal early on in the game. Obviously, having that additional surveil ability for only 2 and a black and to tap it gives you that just additional something to do if you don't have anything else to do on turn 3 or even turn 4 or whatever. If you're playing a bit more of a reactive deck, now you've got that option to be able to surveil. I think this is fantastic, and specifically, it's common. So obviously, Pauper players, I would be very surprised if any Pauper curator wasn't looking to include this in their cube. I think it's just really well designed. I think it fits beautifully in your artifact cube. I think it's an amazing Pauper cube card, and I think it's a big win. Great design.
Now, I don't think we're asking the right question when we talk about this card, because how many arguments do you think that the Wizards of the Coast team had that this should be a bobblehead? Like, have that type bobblehead, like what we saw in the Fallout Universes Beyond, where we have cards that outright say pay off for having a certain amount of bobbleheads, and this is a bobble that's a bobblehead, but it's not a bobblehead type.
Do you know why you say that?
How many arguments do you think they had?
I'm going to explain that why, and this is because of you darn Yankees, right? Sorry, no offense to you Southerners out there or your Midwesterners or whatever.
It's all America to you, isn't it?
Yankees and your baubles, okay? It's not a bauble, like bobble. It's a bauble, okay? So if you were to pronounce this word correctly, it is a bauble and not a bauble. But yes, it's on a dashboard. It's got this goat head skull on the art.
It's got a big bouncy head and
it's
a little body.
It's a bobblehead.
It is a bobblehead.
I feel like a bobblehead now.
If we aren't going to call it a bobblehead, then we should at least consider it a Funko Pop at the very least, and I don't think that's better.
No, I think bobblehead is on the money. I think you're right on point with that for sure.
It's a bobble.
So cool card. We're going to add this card, and despite the Funko Pop, we're going to go ahead and add this to Uber's Artifact Cube. This is the next one that I'm considering before we get into our main section here, but this one I think is really neat. So green has always suffered. Green has always struggled in my Artifact Cube environment because, as we talked about before, it was always the I hate artifacts type of section. It's been disenchants or wreck sages or anything like that. It's always come in, destroy artifacts. So it's very rare when I get something that kind of supports the idea of it. This next one I really do like. It's Thunderous Velocipede. For 1 colorless and green, you get a 5/5 artifact vehicle. Trample. Each other vehicle and creature you control enters with an additional 1/1 counter on it if its mana value is 4 or less. Otherwise, it enters with 3 additional 1/1 counters on it. Crew 3. This is like, it might as well just be another Hardened Scales. I love everything about this card. Am I reading that correctly?
I don't think it's Hardened Scales. I think it's another, not Grumgully, but...
Oh, the green one, the one that's a devotion one.
Yeah, it's a devotion one. Can't remember. It's more akin to like a Grumgully effect than it is to like Hardened Scales. Hardened Scales is when you're doubling counters. This is more akin to, hey, my thing entered, it gets extra counters. But the thing that I will say that it does better than all those cards is that if the thing that you're casting has a mana cost 4 or higher, then it's 3 counters, and that's huge.
Do you know what I love about cards like this? I love cards that are in my hand and there's not a tension on whether or not I need to sandbag it because the effect is only good after I've hit a certain point, right? So this is great if you play it on turn 3 and then you've got 1, 2, and 3 CMC creatures in your hand. Okay, they only get +1/+1/+1 counter, but no big deal. But it's not like I want to wait to play this because, you know, I need those to get that effect. And then, you know, other future cards aren't going to get an effect. I know that probably wasn't a great explanation, but this card is great because you get the benefit anytime you play it. You get the benefit before, you get the benefit after. It's fantastic. And I think this fits well with this awful aggro archetype. Oh my gosh, I hate some. No, I'm just kidding. But I think this is a really, really good card. I think this is, again, it's a 3 mana 5/5. Obviously, it's a vehicle. So those cards are typically the power and toughness are above the CMC level. But I think this can be a very aggressive card. I think it can obviously enable any deck where you're just going crazy with green creatures. Even just say that. Like, I want to go crazy with green creatures. I want to switch my brain off and turn and just play green creatures.
What about my persist decks?
I don't think persist is in the artifact cube, but man,
It's not.
No.
why would this be so good for persist? I mean, tell someone that's never played persist why this would be so insane.
So, unlike all the other ones like Grumgully and Co., this is not a creature unless you want it to be. So, it innately does not eat a lot of creature removal. So, if you have something like Murderous Redcap, for example, where when it enters the battlefield, does a thing. Doesn't matter what that thing is, just know that it enters the battlefield, does a thing. But when it dies, it comes back if it didn't have a -1/-1 counter on it. However, since it enters, it gets a +1/+1 counter, which removes the -1/-1 counter, which means that you can sacrifice it again.
Yeah, I was going to say, what happens if you have a sacrifice outlet? Is there any way to go infinite with an effect like that?
Yeah, usually you have a sacrifice outlet, the persist creature, and then something to give it counters. Gasp.
Well, how many of those do you have?
It's not just an aggro card, it's also a combo card.
It is. So yes, obviously discussing this outside. So I don't know if Anthony has a combo. Do you? I don't think you have that in your artifact cube, right? But yeah, I agree 100%.
The whole reason I mentioned it is because it's literally not relevant at all.
Absolutely, I couldn't go. And actually, that Murderous Redcap combo is a favorite of mine. I have it as a win condition in one of my commander decks. It's in the Fey Cube, obviously. But we're talking about me now. All right. No, we're not. We're talking about you. So is this going in?
Not the fake you. Absolutely not.
Why not?
The Fey tank.
I mean, come on, mate. I mean, it's got this beautiful grassy, deserty kind. Look at those beautiful fairy butterflies that are flying around, right? Surely that's on flavor for the Fey Cube.
Fey Fury. All right. You guys have went off on tangent number 47 at this point. May, you've got some more cards.
I do.
That you're dying to add in here that you're interested for what cube?
So these I don't have particular cubes in mind for. However, I think that for a few of these, that they are good enough that they should be talked about. One in particular I wanted to recommend for your artifact cube. So I'm going to actually start with that one. It is Pact Doll Terror. It's 3 and a black for a 3/4. It's an artifact creature toy. When this creature or another artifact you control enters, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. It is just another one of those, hey, artifact entered and drain my opponent effects. And the reason that I'm mentioning it is that it's a redundancy piece, and it is fine enough on its own. Like, it's not an amazing card, but I think having redundancy for those types of effects, if you want to support more of those, I think that could be a consideration. Which is why I wanted to mention it.
It's pretty neat, actually, too, for like the KCI loop, too. It completes that for a kill spell, so you don't have to just feed the mana. You can just keep looping it. Okay.
I agree. And even just as a value engine with things like Marionette Master, Marionette Apprentice, cards like that just, you're not just playing them in those kind of drainy decks, but I think it works well.
I totally missed that card, so I'll add that to the list of I don't know what I'm going to cut.
So, another card that I wanted to mention was Molt Tender. It is a 1 green 1/1. You can tap it to mill a card, or you can tap it, exile a card from your graveyard, and add 1 mana of any color. So, I kind of feel like that this is almost Death Shaman Light, where, sure, it's not going to be nearly as useful as a Death Shaman, right? But the fact that you can effectively get that exile a card from your graveyard and get a mana back, while also having a mill piece, can be useful for a lot of engines. And there's a particular, let's say, niche that having a Rainbow Dork can fill that I feel like Molt Tender really slots in for those Golgari packages, for those Simic Mill packages, whatever you're trying to do that cares about getting things into the graveyard, or that cares about having a Rainbow Dork on turn 1, I feel like that is just a redundancy piece that should be at least mentioned.
Yeah, I would agree. The restriction of it has to be a card from your graveyard to add 1 mana of any color is kind of on flavor with the fact that this is a uncommon. I think that kind of hits that on the nose. But I agree, and having the tap to mill a card is kind of gravy. So yeah, agree. I like this card.
Yeah, I agree too. That's pretty neat. That's fun. I think that's neat for like a graveyard synergy type cube, like the Bug Sandwich cube, for example, that'll be featured at UberCubeathon. As we talk about a lot of these cubes, they will be featured at UberCubeathon on April 26th at the Gathering Place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Tickets are on sale right now. It'll be a 64-player event. Round 1 will be 64 players. Round 2 will be 64 players. And then we'll whittle down to a top 8 that will be playing my Powered Vintage Cube. Tickets are on sale. Check them out now. Looking forward to seeing all the listeners there. And back to the show.
The next one drop that I wanted to mention is actually Gas Guzzler, where it, on surface level, it is just another black 2/1 zombie that enters tap. But in this case, it's not a zombie, it's a vampire. Okay. However, this is not just the tapped zombie with upside, it is tapped zombie with set mechanic. And this set mechanic we didn't really get to talk about last episode, and I feel like we should at least mention it, and that's start your engines. And I feel like the reason that we aren't wanting to talk about it is just that it's very hard to evaluate at the moment. If you have no speed, it starts at 1. It increases once on each of your turns when an opponent loses life, and the max speed is 4. Once you are max speed, you can pay 1 black, sacrifice another creature or vehicle, and then draw a card. This matters because, unlike a lot of the other start your engine cards, this drops as a 1-drop. Which means that from the start of the game, you can start your engine. And since you're in black, it's not that difficult to like lower your opponent's health every turn subsequent from when Guzzler enters play, right? So that last part is very, very important, though. Being able to have a sacrifice outlet that lets you draw cards is pretty game-changing, considering how low of an investment this card is.
I would agree. So this is another mechanic that I'm not a huge fan of. So again, going back to what we talked about the previous time, is it's now another counter. It's another mechanic, sub-game that we've got to keep track of. And also,
I said it's annoying.
It is annoying. I'm not a fan of these. At least with the Monarch, you just pass a token or something back and forth anytime someone deals combat damage. But this is something now you've got to keep track of it, and it can increase, right? Okay, it can't decrease, but it's another piece. It's another something that has to be kept track of each turn, which, I'll be honest, I'm not that detail oriented, so at least not when I'm playing Magic, so I'm not a huge fan of it.
I love design for arena mechanics. Yay!
Yeah, right. This isn't something we talk about too much on the podcast, but I really do feel that there's a lot to be said for whether or not Wizards is intentionally going this way with mechanics that are basically taken care of for you when you play on Magic Online or when you play on Magic Arena. So you ain't got to worry about it when you're playing electronically. But when you're playing in paper, now it requires the players to keep track of it. And especially given some of the recent conversations that have happened and some of the, dare I call them incidents that have happened with some of the professional tournaments and the pro tours, or whatever they are nowadays. But I can imagine this, it only gets more and more complicated for the players, and every single time you add something that's just an additional mechanic that the players have got to keep track of. In a cube environment, we generally push this as kind of being fun, and we're not trying to be super competitive, we're just trying to enjoy the game. But I can certainly see, we're talking about cube, but the more you introduce things like this, it's just more things for the players to have to keep track of. And that's something that, for me individually, and, whether either yourself, Anthony, or May, how you feel about this, I'll leave you guys to kind of, share your opinions on it. But I'm not a
I feel the same way. This is a digital type of mechanic.
Digital-friendly mechanic,
and
exactly.
One v one. I think this is okay. Like, it's kind of like tracking day night or something like that. It's got its annoyances, but at least two people can converge on this idea. Well, I see problems with cards like this is, you already said it, people that are going to, Pleasant Canopy actually talked about this recently in an episode where it's not cheating on purpose, but it does, accidentally cheating, if you're going to call that, mistakes are going to happen, things like that are going to happen. And this is going to be one of those cards, this mechanic is going to show up in our play group, certain circles, and it's going to be a creature's going to turn sideways. It's going to look pretty benign. You're not going to block it. And then they're going to explain to you that it's now max speed. And now you're going to be losing your mind because you've lost to some kind of crazy effect that makes no sense on paper. These type of cards, it's just reading the card doesn't explain the card, not very well. And you have to have an intimate knowledge of the card and every single step on it. So it creates more mental tasking for me. And I kind of want to I think there's been this resurgence of that in the Cube community where people are stepping back and realizing that during the draft experience, it slows it down. People need to read and understand the cards. It needs to be very clean and concise. That's where we've got this one cube. It's the clean cube that's going to be in our event where there's no more than like 3 lines of text, for example. I mean, people are embracing this, so I can see that.
I don't mind reading the text on a card. I don't mind reading the text on a card twice. What I don't like is, okay, there's a start your engines and max speed. So now, not only do I have to worry about this card, but now every single time I take a turn, and even every time my opponent maybe makes a play, I have to think, okay, any permanent that has this ability out there, I've got to read this every single time this could potentially be impactful to the game, because I have to potentially plan my interactions with my opponent around this sub ability, right? This new sub game that I've got to play, right? Now, something like this, sack another creature, that ain't no small thing, right? Someone might look at this and think, oh, it's just sacrifice another creature, draw a card. Yeah, but what are all the other game pieces that exist on the battlefield that have an interaction with you drawing cards and with you sacrificing creatures and with you having max speed? And this is where Magic is a complicated game outside of these just convoluted mechanics that exist, and this is why I dislike it.
I have a question about max speed. Is it individualized or is it global? I mean, like, do you have to track each one of these? Individually trying to achieve?
Absolutely. Potentially, if each player has cards that have max speed or have start your engines is the name of the mechanic, yes, you will need to have a counter per player that shows their speed, and any time on their turn that an opponent loses life, they will increase their speed. So now you've got to keep an eye on not just a monarch token that can pass around the board, right? Pass back and forth in a 2-player game or pass around the table in a 4-player game. But now you've got to look at, okay, what speed is my single opponent at? Or what speed are my 3 opponents at? And what is every single game piece that they have on the battlefield? What is it right now? What could it be if an opponent loses life? And maybe in a cube game and you're just playing one-on-one, what does that mean if I lose life this turn? What is every single piece, and what could be the impact to this game if they now get to max speed? And that, honestly, like I say, for me, that is not a level of detail that I really care to have to pay attention to in a game that is already as complicated as Magic is.
I agree. It's one of the big reasons that I wanted to point out this card in particular, because this is a card where the juice can be worth the squeeze. There are people that are going to consider this for their environment. But the reason that we should talk about it is that in this particular case where it's just like, hey, this is like one of the lower investments, comes out early, you can like reasonably get to max speed 4 like on turn 5 or so. Like this is a relevant enough card that if it manages to stick around that long, that it could be good. But it's not a matter that it's good. It's a matter that if your players want to play with that kind of mechanic. And I think that what we've been seeing a lot with Initiative, what we've been seeing with this, with Day-Night, whatnot, is that people do not like external game pieces that we have to track, because it is annoying, it's a pain, but you as the curator have to decide whether or not that's worth it. Moving on, I wanted to highlight, I don't want to say that it's an oversight as much as a curiosity. So I'm not sure if you both noticed this in the overview or the set preview, that there's been a lot of vanilla creatures that have came out in this set. Not only have there been vanilla creatures that came out this set, but they're particularly pushed. I picked out 2 in particular as this, I want to say heinous, It is kind of heinous what they did. All
I don't
right?
think I've ever heard
So
you use
first
that
we
word
have
before. That's awesome, man. I like that. So you must have
word of
quite
the day is
strong
heinous.
feelings about these cards if you're
I
using
have
words
strong
like heinous. All right, cool.
So Sundial Dawn Tyrant is 1 and a white for a vanilla 3/3. 2 mana 3/3 in white. That is not what white is supposed to do. Let's just get that out of the way, right? Big creatures are green things, right? That has been the consistent thing. Now, if this was like an across the board thing where it's just like, hey, any vanillas that we're going to push forward from here on out is all going to be pushed, then I'd be like, okay, yeah, sure, that's whatever. Except in this exact same set, they came out with Gibberic Omnivore, which is 1 and a green, vanilla 3/2, 1 toughness less than the white card.
Crazy, like when you consider that they, Grim Bauble, so you've now given white-black the ability to pay their 3 mana for their 3/3, and green just gets their 3/2, and white just says, or white-black just says, cool, I'm going to Grim Bauble your pathetic little 3/2 vanilla creature, and I get to surveil for 3 mana at a later turn, and I can swing for 3.
Yep. I don't know how we got to the point where... I'm glad that we're seeing vanilla creatures. I am always happy to see vanilla creatures pop up in sets, or even French vanilla creatures pop up in sets. The simplicity is beautiful. However, there is a blatant kind of disregard to the color pie when it comes to some of these decisions. And I know that the overarching conversation has been wildly boiled down to color pie is a myth. It has already been like blurred lines for the last couple years and whatnot. But I feel like that this is the most egregious of those examples because we took something that was explicitly, this is green's thing. Green gets the vanilla, I won't say vanilla, but the big dumb creatures, right? That's green shtick. And then you just take white shtick, who is supposed to have a bunch of the hate bears, and like their best creatures are things like Savannah Lions and whatnot. Like, sure, we get like a bunch of 2/1s, but majority of our 2-drops are just 2/2s and whatnot. But they also just tend to have like more keywords like Vigilance and First Strike and have relevant hating abilities. And green's just kind of getting left in the dust here. And I feel like that's kind of at least noteworthy. I couldn't not laugh at it.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think you're so on the money with that. And especially because this is one colorless and a green. Maybe, right? And I've kind of been a bit of a juxtaposition to our aforementioned good friend of the channel, JP, Justin Parnell, who has, if I remember this correctly, but he's kind of an anti-pips kind of guy, right? He's not a fan of like more and more colored mana on the spells, whereas I have always been in the position that I think Wizards should be adding pips and reducing the amount of colored mana, or colorless mana, I should say, especially when so many ETB and activated abilities are tacked onto creatures nowadays, right? So they've gone from all these, you look at this. This is 2 mana for a 3/2. Okay, fine. But then you've got Ragavan. How do they exist in the same game? And even you could go a gazillion years ago, right? And again, I used to be a mono green, filthy, stompy player. This is 1 colorless and a green for a 3/2, nothing else. It's uninspired. You could also pay green for a Colonian Tusker, which is a 3/3. Why would you play this card unless the colorless pip is important? Or you could even go a step further to something like Talara's Battalion, which is a 4/3 with trample for 1 green and 1 colorless. You do have to have cast another green spell this turn in order to be able to play it. But I just don't understand the logic of including a 3/2 vanilla, 1 colorless, 1 green in 2025 Magic. It just makes no sense to me.
I just find it particularly interesting, and I'm just going to shut this down before anybody tries to respond being like, well, one of these is a common and one of these is an uncommon, so that's not a fair comparison. It's 1 toughness. They are effectively doing the same thing. They could both be common, they could both be uncommon. It does not matter, all right? Let's just get that out of the way.
Yes.
All right? The egregious part is the fact that they are both the 2 mana slot, all right? Yes. In a draft, you are more likely to see the green 3/2 than you are to see the white 3/3. However, why does the white color have the 3/3 and the green color has the 3/2 with no keyword. If it had trample, I'd be like, okay, great, perfect. Send it. No notes, right? But the fact that they're both vanilla, both in the same set, both at the same cost, is at least noteworthy. Sorry to kind of get on my soapbox.
Oh, it's something that people were talking about this. They were high on these cards. Let's switch off of the vanilla creatures and let's switch over to the Gear Hulks. And so we've talked about a lot in the past about I like to curate my cubes with Titan cycles. It's just something I like to do. And when I'm saying Titan cycles, I'm referring back to the original Titans that came out. Was it during a core set? It would have been stuff like Frost Titan, Inferno Titan, Grave Titan, Sun Titan, so on and so forth. I'm missing what? Primeval Titan. And using Titan, those as a fixture. Yeah, because I do miss that one very much. I'm hoping they unban that in Commander. But I also did that kind of model in my artifact cube. So whenever I'm introducing the idea of this cube when I first built it, something I knew I had to have, and I'll include these in the show notes. I'm not going to read what they all do, but Cataclysmic Gear Hulk, Torrential Gear Hulk, Noxious Gear Hulk, Combustible Gear Hulk, and Virtuous Gear Hulk. They're all included in my artifact cube as my air quotes Titan cycle. So I was having this conversation about 2.5 months ago with our good friend Kirby and Shoop. And Kirby and Shoop are both going to have cubes that are going to be featured at UberCubeathon on April 26th. Shoop's going to have his abs band, his junk cube, and Kirby's going to have the creative cube. But Kirby kind of raised the question of, hey, I noticed you only have one card per guild slot in your artifact cube. And it's kind of been that way forever at this point. And people have asked me all the time, why don't you expand your guild sections? And I could go on and on about how the cube is really heavily focused on colorless mana, and I don't provide a lot of mana to support outside of that. But recently, when they started doing the spoilers for Aetherdrift, there were a few cards that have caught my eye that made me consider, and I'm going to say the word consider, the idea of possibly expanding my guild section. I'm going to say possible because I'm going to go ahead and skip to the end of the story and tell you that I'm probably not. I'm still going to stick with the one. But here's what came out recently, and I'm going to include these in the show notes because they are lengthy and there's a lot to read. But the new ones, the Gear Hulks that have come out, are all ally colors. And it's going to be Bright Glass Gear Hulk, Holstoke Gear Hulk, Oil Deep Gear Hulk,
Coalstoke,
Firewood.
That's an American card. And I will not stand for this.
Firewood. Yeah, we got Firewood Gear Hulk and Riptide Gear Hulk. And so I studied each one of these, and I asked myself, as itself, am I willing to maybe go to 2 per guild? And I'm going to say no. Right now, out of this whole section, after evaluating them, here was the gist of what each one of these cards do, without reading all the text. Bright Glass Gear Hulk has First Strike and Trample. It's a 4/4, very powerful on the board. And it's going to basically go fetch 2 mana value artifacts or enchantments that are 1 or less and put them in your hand. The Coalstoke one is Menace and Death Touch, 5/4, and it's basically going to bring a creature back with a finality counter on it. The Old Deep Gear Hulk is basically looking at their hand. You get to strip a card, you replace it type thing, which is weird. Firewood Gear Hulk. It's the worst one. Firewood Gear Hulk is a Vigilance Menace 7/7, and it gives your stuff +2/+2, and they gain Vigilance and Menace, so it's a weird overrun effect. And then Riptide Gear Hulk, which is going to have Double Strike, 2/5, and Prowess. And then when it enters, you can basically put up to 1 target non-land permanent that player controls into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. So of these, that's the best one, in my opinion.
Definitely the best one.
Yep. And of these 3, in context, in relationship to Uberbear's Artifact Cube, the 2 I have narrowed down as Bright Glass and Riptide. I'm going to go a little further. And so now I'm looking at it like, if I'm going to run Bright Glass, that is a First Strike Trample that costs 2 green pips and 2 white pips for a 4/4. Can players actually effectively hardcast that? And I'm going to say it's going to be really hard. We already kind of know that because you say you love pips, right, Stu?
I actually don't think these are going to be as difficult as you expect them to be, because I played a 3-color deck during our most recent draft of your Artifact Cube. I didn't have any problems casting my spells. Not one time. And none of these are 3-color. They're all 2-color. So I don't think these are going to be difficult to cast. What I like about them, again, going all the way back to the previous episode, is they are good for your constructs deck, right? And there are constructs across a bunch of different colors, so they can fit into that deck, or a player can choose if one of them has an effect that they particularly like, think they can take advantage of outside of the restrictions of it being a construct and just part of whatever else their deck is trying to do, then there you go. It can be something fun. I actually think that the Oil Deep Gear Hulk, which is said to be the weakest, quote unquote, it's also the cheapest with Bright Glass Gear Hulk, which I actually think is the most powerful, or at least up there with the most powerful. Oil Deep Gear Hulk is 2 blue, 2 black. It's difficult only for the fact that it's 4 mana, no colorless mana, 2 blue, 2 black. It does have lifelink. It does have Ward 1. It does have the, strip a card from your opponent's hand and then they draw one. But that is not an effect to be underestimated. You take their most powerful card and they just draw, hopefully, a land or some other nonsense that isn't going to be impactful. So overall, I like them. I think, again, given the fact that you have a lot of construct support in the artifact cube, I think there's a place for these. Maybe not all of them, but at least some of them. And I think that they're okay. They're not huge. They're not game changing necessarily. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not in the right deck. No, I don't think they are. But I think that it's not something that I would look at and poo-poo them just off the bat because they're a little expensive and the effects aren't super powerful. I actually think in the artifact cube, they're just fine.
I agree with the majority of your points. I think the main thing that I want to point out with the Gear Hulks is that, completely unasked ranking, I think Riptide's the best. Just across the board, it is the best. It just comes in, hey, that thing, yeah, put it third from the top. Pyrowood Gear Hulk would be the next one that I would consider, just because, sure, it's a weird overrun effect, but giving all of your things Menace Vigilance, and most importantly, damage that cannot be prevented with +2/+2 is pretty big, while it itself is a 7/7 with Vigilance Menace, and I feel like that is at least cute enough to mention. The Bright Glass Gear Hulk, I feel like, is the next runner-up, just because being able to tutor for 2 things and put them into your hands, even if they're just 1 mana, is cute enough that I would consider it for an Oswald deck. That is the main reason that I would consider Bright Glass, is that, hey, did I already draft Oswald, or am I drafting this and then grabbing Oswald? Because I want to put that in the Oswald deck. That's where that would go. And then the last one is Coal Stroke, second to last one is Coal Stroke, because Menace Death Touch is just such a weird combination, but at least it comes in, brings in something 4 or less, and it has haste when it comes in, and then it just immediately exiles at their turn, so it's just kind of whatever. However, Oil Deep is the worst. Never consider that one. Please don't consider that one. I'm begging you.
I honestly don't think it's that bad. The reason why Pyrowood Gear Hulk I think is okay but not great is the fact that it's expensive to bring in. It's 6 mana. It itself does not have haste, so it's not attacking. It's giving all your other creatures +2/+2 and menace, which is definitely a powerful effect. But it's not like it gives creatures haste, and it feels kind of weird. You need to have a big board presence before this even comes in. I think it's fine, but it's like, if you've got enough creatures and they're strong enough to get to maybe even think about getting through, and you're paying 6 mana for these, it's going to win some games, no doubt. But I think it's a good card. Is it a great card? Maybe not, but I don't think any of them are great.
I agree.
No, I agree. So mechanically, this is what I'm kind of dealing with. So I have to look at them kind of early game, late game. What do they do to impact current play? It was easy for me to get sucked into the big shiny, I want to just have more Gear Hulks. And that was my initial thought was, oh my God, I gotta catch them all like Pokemon, right? But Bright Glass, I play that, and I was trying to figure out, what do I go get that's substantial? So I could get, like, I don't know, let's say a Shadow Spear. Urz's Bauble. I'll go get a Thopter Assembly. I'll go get something like that. That's why I'm allowing that one to probably enter the environment. The thing I have to evaluate is I've cut back on my removal suite for artifacts, and I want to be careful not to cut it back so much that everything sticks, right? So I'm trying to find that balancing act. So I think that one's a pretty much a shoe-in. And then Riptide does something that's interesting and dynamic enough. Whereas going back to what you talked about with the Pyrowood Gear Hulk, you have to have a board state for it to matter. Everything, you have to basically have this army of Thopters or something that gets all these plus two buffs. And you don't have any flicker effects in this environment. So it's a one and done unless you find a way to kill it and recur it type situation, right? So it feels a little try hard for an overrun. If it sticks, it's great. But the fact that Stu pointed it out, doesn't have haste. I want each one of these, going back to the original 5 that were in this group, that would be Cataclysmic, Combustible, Noxious, Torrential, and Verdurous. All of those actually, Verdurous, Verdurous,
Green
Hulk. Each one of those all have impactful ETBs that come in and do matter to the gameplay and the game state.
That's
Whereas
my
these other
point
ones are
right
very
there.
situationally based.
Yeah, that is my point right there. Bright Glass and Oil Deep do not require other things, right? Not that others necessarily don't, but those two things are impactful regardless of what's going on the board, right? You either go and grab something from your library, or you get to look at your opponent's hand and tell them to discard their most powerful card. The other cards, again, going back to Pyrowood, that requires a board state. Coldstoke Gear Hulk requires something to be in your graveyard for it to get the value, and that's 5 mana. For a 5/4 Menace Death Touch, which is no small thing, right? Even if it just came in and did nothing, that's not terrible. But I love cards that come in and do something and don't require conditions for them to be powerful, and that's why I like those cards. All right, now it's my turn.
Look, maybe I'm just overrating the Pyrowood just because the inner Commander Timmy player is just like, ooh, big scary Gear Hulk with a big ETB effect. Yay!
All right, now it's my turn. I'm gonna sort of pose a couple. So these are a couple of cards that I liked from this set. Actually, I had 5 originally. 2 of them we've already mentioned. One of them is Market Back Walker, which we mentioned in the previous episode, and Grim Bauble. So the first one I want to talk about is Haunt the Network. This is 3 colorless, 1 blue, 1 black, and a sorcery. Choose target opponent. Create 2 1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. Then the chosen player loses X life and you gain X life, where X is the number of artifacts you control. The reason why I like cards like this, especially anything in blue, is because blue I always kind of look at as, where does this fit in a control shell? Similarly with black, right? Because I'm at heart a Demir control-y kind of player. And this is an uncommon, and it's just, hey, I get to maybe just put some artifacts into play for the first few turns, and then I just get to pay 5 mana, play this card, you lose some life, I gain some life, great for stabilization, and I get a little board presence here. It's not crazy powerful, it's just a card that I like because it's simple, it just does what it says on the tin, can be very, very good in the archetypes that I believe the colors support it. And I don't know, I'll ask you guys what you think about cards like this, but something like this that is fairly simple, I just like cards like this.
I'm sorry, say the card name again.
I'm gonna take the Andy Mangold approach because, you know, LPR talks about it a lot, and they have influenced me on this situation. And because we are putting our cubes in these timed situations, outside of casual, right? We're putting our cubes into timed 55-minute slots, and it's happening more often than not. I really want to be cognizant of the volume of life gain and life exchange that I do in some of my particular environments that are exposed to a clock. For only that reason, not that I dislike it or have any feelings on the matter, it's just the clock. I just don't want to go to draws. So I have to think about that a lot, because the more I introduce that into these environments, that's the more on the, I think about that more often than not now. That's it. And if I'm doing life exchange, that's a factor.
That is a great point. And that actually came up during our recent trip. So we went to Ravenforge Games, as Anthony mentioned earlier, in Sanford, North Carolina. We did a wonderful event there to do some support an event for social programs for homeless people in Lee County, North Carolina. And the first game that I played in the first cube that we drafted, which was a legacy cube, went to time. And actually the second game that my opponent played also went to time. So she was 0-0-2 through the first two games. I don't know if I've ever seen that before in a cube or like in a match like or in an event like that. It was crazy. And she ended up actually winning her third game. And I think she finished either second or maybe third in the overall. I was fortunate enough. I drew with her and then won my next two games. So I finished top. And I don't know if I've posted the deck yet. But yeah, that was something that came up numerous times, not just through the draft of that cube, but also through the draft of the second cube. You get 50 minutes. And we were looking at each other, and there was like 20 minutes left on the clock, and we were like just starting our second match. We're like, where the heck did the time go? And obviously, this isn't a big deal if you're just drafting a cube with your group and you're just hanging out, or if you're maybe even at a local store, even though, you know, time is a resource as much as anything in Magic. Time is a resource, right? You want to give people value for their time, especially if you're asking them to draft and play your cube. And I agree with that. I think that that's something that we haven't really covered in an episode, and maybe this actually deserves an episode all by itself, is where we talk about mechanics in Magic that just suck time unnecessarily. And maybe this is one of those cards. And I'll be honest, I didn't think about it that way. I'm just thinking about it purely from within what archetypes can this support within Magic. And maybe you're absolutely right that the reason why these cards can potentially be just not great inclusions in a cube is because it just drags it out. And the more time that you've got playing these games and playing cards that are just not necessarily advancing the game and advancing the fun, are just advancing the time, and maybe we need to not have as many of those? Question mark? I don't know. You tell me how you feel. But that's been a great comment, and now I'm immediately rethinking it.
No, I feel exactly the same way as we go off on that tangent. Again, we love our tangents here at UberCube, but this topic actually came up recently with our good friend David, and he was asking about his mono white cube at our event. And for the reason exclusively that we talked about it was the time factor. The cube is amazing, well balanced and proportioned, but life gain is a archetype held within that environment. So it is a consideration whenever you're doing these time events. That's it. I mean, that's probably enough to put a bow on that.
We've talked about this in previous episodes. The first time that I drafted that cube, I played against David. He beat me. Not unexpected, right? His cube, he's a good player, he's a better player than I am. Our game lasted like an hour and a half, and I had drafted not even an intentional, like, I'm just trying to gain life. It was just kind of incidental within the deck that I drafted, but he had drafted a gain life deck, and it was an hour and a half at least that we were sitting there, and everyone else had like played a game, played an opponent, played a game for fun, gone for a walked their dog, bought a new house, and we were still sitting there playing game number one. And we were like, okay, you've got 35 life, I've got 47 life, we've both got 12 cards left in our life. Like, it was that level of just a bit of a stalemate, right? And it was fun to play the cube. There wasn't a time that I wasn't having fun. But, oh my gosh, I wanted the game to end because I wanted to progress with everything else that should happen during the drafting and the playing of a cube, which is everyone plays, and then you rotate, and you play your next player, and then you rotate again and play the next. And that was just not a way to keep that process going.
It sounds like we should have an episode talking about how to actually build life gain within your cubes. That way it's not miserable.
As in don't?
Yeah.
Look,
yeah, there's a whole topic. We'll reserve that for later.
Has both mill that Anthony hates and life gain that you hate, and both of the things work fine enough.
Yeah, now you're relying on mill against life gain.
It can be done.
Just, oh my.
I promise it can be done.
All right, I'm moving on. All right, so my next card.
We're moving on.
Yes, we're moving on. All right, so next card. This is one, I don't know why I chose this one. It just kind of stuck out to me mechanically in this set. So it's Full Throttle. This is 4 colorless and 2 red for a sorcery. After this main phase, there are 2 additional combat phases. At the beginning of each combat this turn, untap all creatures that attacked this turn. I don't know. I just
because you want to play Commander. I mean, that's a Commander card. That is Commander.
It could be
personified.
It can absolutely be. No, I don't disagree. This is going to see a ton of Commander play. Where I see this is in any cube where maybe, just maybe, you're not always just tapping your creatures when they attack. Maybe you've got other abilities when they attack or when they tap, like drawing cards or dealing damage or some other kind of
inspired or whatever.
Could be, right? Make tokens. I mean, who knows, right? There's a lot of different reasons that creatures attack, or there's a lot of different reasons that creatures tap that doesn't always involve them attacking. And this does it twice for a 6 mana. So you're absolutely right. Is this a Commander card? 100%. But could this be a card that maybe has a home somewhere in a cube? And again, I try to go a little bit like off the beaten path maybe, because obviously you're, Anthony, looking at cards that are going to be good for your cubes, as well as May, you're looking at cards that are going to be good for your cubes. So I was just looking at cards that just looked interesting, and that's it. But we're moving on. The next card, and this is the last card, I want to tie this in with our previous episode. This is, well, not previous episode, previous episode. This is part 2. We had part 1. And in the episode beforehand, we were talking about Simic with Usman, the most amazing Usman, the godfather of Cube, about Simic and the difficulty of creating an environment that includes Simic that isn't just the generic-y, Simic-y way of doing things, right? And I kind of feel that I'm just supporting the fact that Simic just does the Simic-y way of doing things. This is Sab Sunen Luxa Embodied. 3 colorless, green-blue, legendary creature god. Reach, trample, indestructible, 6/6. Can't attack or block unless it has an even number of counters on it. And at the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on Sab Sunen. Then if it has an odd number of counters on it, draw 2 cards. There's a word here. It begins with V.
Frog legs.
It begins with V. It starts with V. It rhymes with value. And it just kind of...
Clearly, it's velocity.
How did you know, May? Well done. God, this is why you're the smart one.
Look, I'm here for the frog wife. I think that it definitely does
incredible.
the Simic value things, but like, go off. I think it's fine. It does a unique thing.
What is the unique thing that it does, May? Please let me know. Is it that?
The unique thing that it does is that
cards?
Effectively, if you don't add counters, every other turn it's able to attack with reach, trample, indestructible. And this matters because it's already a 6/6 at 5 mana. But every turn that it can't attack, you draw 2 cards, which is a Simic value thing. I am worried about how it's worded because it says at the beginning of your first main phase, put a +1/+1 counter on it, because it kind of implies that, it just gets it once. Then anything above that, you have to figure out the way to get the additional counters on it. And then it's no longer in every other turn. It's just, we're now doing Simic value things again.
Well, it has to say that, right? It can't say your pre-combat main phase for the purposes of nonsense like Full Throttle, where if you have multiple combat phases, you now get to put, imagine playing both of those, right? Now you've got 3 pre-combat main phases and actually, do you? No, I suppose you do. Actually, never mind. Cut that out. But the reason why it has to say that is because you can't do that twice a turn. It's just, that's way too bonkers powerful for a 5.
Oh, I'm not worried about it, the twice a turn part.
No.
It was just making sure that it's clear that this is every turn. This isn't every turn.
It is every turn, exactly. So every turn, first main phase, you're either drawing cards or just smacking fools with it. Right?
I'm just wanting to clarify that because some people could read that and be confused.
Agreed. You're 100% correct. But obviously this grows very quickly. But it's a straight up value card. Like, that's it. It grows. It draws cards. It's that's it. It's cool. I think it's actually very, very powerful. But it kind of encompasses
if it was a 4/4, it would have been perfectly acceptable. But instead it's a 6/6. So here we are.
It has to be 6/6 because it has to swing for 7. and then 9,
Fair enough.
and then 11, and then
Gotta get
13,
that EDH damage.
and then 15.
Anyways.
All right, last thing I will say is for all you Peasant Cube curators out there, and I'm sure our resident friend of the channel, Samage, will be looking at Sky Serpent Seeker, green and a blue for a creature snake, 1/1 flying death touch. With an exhaust 4, reveal cards from the top of your library and to reveal 2 land cards. Put those land cards onto the battlefield, tapped, and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order, and then put a +1/+1 counter on it. Another Simic creature, again, very high value, pretty cool Peasant Cube card, in my opinion. And I think that's a great sort of endpoint for this set. A lot of good value. I think curators in general will have a lot of fun with this set. I don't think this is as obvious a set as we've seen in the past, but I think in general there's some fun here to be had for everybody.
Yeah, I would agree. It's all about the family here is what we really got out of it. We ended on frogs and snakes. But
yes. Family.
I think this set family. It's all about family. But yeah, Vin
Diesel
frog.
is now the host of UberCube. Anthony has retired. Thank you.
Yeah.
With that said, we should probably move on to the socials.
This has been fun. We're moving over to socials. I hope everybody had a great time. Please excuse my voice. I've been sick as a dog. And Stu, take us away to the socials and talk about UberCubeathon one more time.
All right. As we've mentioned, I think about 700 times, and we'll continue to do so. We have UberCubeathon 2025 happening on April 26th, 2025 at the Gathering Place in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. 64 players is our maximum, so get your tickets as soon as possible. 17 cubes. We've changed the format. It's going to be all Swiss. So that means you're going to play a cube, you're going to play another cube, you're going to play another cube at least. There's going to be no elimination. You've got every chance, whatever cube you're playing, whatever round you're in, to get to that top 8 and play a vintage cube and compete for some incredible prizes. It's going to be a huge, fun, just wonderful event. Everyone who we talked to last year said they had a blast, and we're super excited to do it this year and for coming years. We're all going to post the link to go and get tickets in the show notes. We hope to see you there. And thank you to everyone who came last year, and we hope to see you again this year. All right, first of all, again, we are a partner at TCG Player. We would truly appreciate if you guys are buying some cards from TCG Player, you can use our link. We'll make sure Anthony puts it on the Discord to make it available for everyone. It's no skin off anybody's nose, just a simple click on the link, order your cards as you would, and we get a little bonus to help with those microphone stands that we're always looking for. Truly appreciate that. As always, go check out facebook.com/groups/mtgcube, where our current host, Anthony Adams, is a moderator over there with a lot of cool discussion going on. Got about 1,000 members, so lots of cool stuff to check out over there. If you want to support the show, you can use our Inked Gaming affiliate link, inkedgaming.com/UberCube, for some playmats, dice bags, mouse pads, and all kinds of custom and large volume products are available. You can find us at Twitter at UberCubeMTGPod. You can reach us via email at UberCubeMTGPodcast@gmail.com. You can find us at Bluesky at ubercubemtgpodcast.bsky.social, and as always, come hang out on the Discord. All kinds of cool discussion going on there. New card discussion, deck boast, a lot of discussion about these new cards from this new set, Aetherdrift. So if you're looking for some advice or some opinion, some feedback on a card that you're looking at for your cube, then come hang out and be part of the discussion. Finally, as always, a big thanks to all of our Patreons at patreon.com/UberCube for just helping keeping the lights on and supporting the show. I've gone past naming you guys because you know who you are, and I cannot tell you how much we all appreciate your ongoing support. It really means a lot to the show. Thank you to all of you, and I hope you enjoyed this one. And without further ado, we're going to do what we always do and say...
Happy cubing. Happy cubing. Pick up those gear hulks, baby. Let's go.
Black Lotus.